Trust. So we can talk about trust today. It's been kind of an interesting thing for me to see, looking back over my career, where trust has played a part in it, where it is today, and how I've been able to challenge it or improve it as I've gone along. So that's really what this talk's about. So the kind of things that we'll look at are kind of who can I give my work to and who do I give my work to. So what information could I publish is kind of another thing. We're not going to cover that much here. The kind of tools that we might pick, why do we pick them? But also is interesting to think about trust now, because with a lot of us working from home or having been working from home, there's been a lot of trust that we will get on with what we do. And maybe that's a conversation that your teams can have around trust. So first of all, we'll do the kind of the standard beginning. What is trust? So it's a firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. So trust isn't a definite thing. It's what we believe. It's a belief system almost. And we're more likely to believe certain things than other things. So where might we find that trust is missing? Quite often it's between different groups. So if you think about how things were, if you're old enough at least, back in the days of waterfall, there was a definite split between developers and testers. The developers kind of ended up throwing their code over potentially to the testers. The testers then did their thing, passed it back again, and said, actually, this isn't working. And there was contention there because those groups were seen as quite distinct. Thankfully now, with the advent of Agile, we see a lot more collaboration and a lot more overlap in the skills between those two groups, as we might define them. And again, if you just look out in the outside world, you can see this happening as well out in political arenas, in other areas where different groups have got different ideas about things, and so they have some kind of contention going on, and there isn't so much trust there. Another area is maybe where we've been let down before, and that can be a tool that's let us down. It can be a person or a group of people where something's been promised and is not being delivered. Interestingly, some of the TED Talks I've watched to kind of look at this and find out a bit more about trust have said that different cultures value trust in different ways. So, for instance, apparently the Americans have more trust in people that deliver things at all costs. So that's one way to look at it as well, is it can be a cultural thing. And sometimes when something new comes along, we may trust it because we've seen something like that before, or it may be completely new and we're quite distrustful of it. In which case there may be some automatic trust. Trust in this case is where maybe someone from our group that we respect is saying, actually, try this thing, it's really cool. Or it might be that it's someone from another group that you don't trust as much, and so you don't have as much trust in that thing that they're suggesting. So someone in our group, but outside of our group as well, there's the idea of authority. So possibly more so again, if you're my kind of age where you've grown up and you were kind of, it was drummed into you to respect your teachers, to respect the policemen, etc. You might have a thing with authority, and I'll cover that a little bit later. And so that might mean that you trust someone that you see as in authority, regardless of whether they deserve that trust or not. In groups, you have common goals and beliefs, and those beliefs can build up the trust within your group, and building those common goals helps that as well. It may be a familiar brand or tool, so something like Selenium. We don't always question that. We just go, okay, then Selenium, everyone uses it for UI automation. Let's give it a go. We don't necessarily question whether it's the right tool or not. So over to acceptance. So I've included acceptance here because sometimes we just accept that trust is there. So acceptance being the action of consenting to receive or undertake something offered. So we want to accept trust. It helps us grow and it helps us work within a particular area and in a particular team. But sometimes it's quite passive, and we'll accept things as unchangeable. So one of the key examples of this, which I'm going to cover later, is flaky tests in UI automation. There seems to be a general consensus that whenever you do UI automation, you're going to get flaky tests. Maybe we're too accepting of that. We have a distrust of UI automation, and in my experience, you can work at that. You can improve your UI tests, and so the flaky tests are just a tiny part of what happens, rather than it being something you accept. Common models. A problem we have with models is that while they're useful to try and understand the world, we sometimes take them as the truth. And so we'll take that model and we try and fit things into that model. You know, it's the kind of thing where you have something that this is the way I'm going to view the world, and you try and squish everything in there to make that view correct. And then just tradition, we accept things as true. We have had, like I say, olden times, you have developers and testers as very separate, and we still see those two roles as separate. And yet there's a lot of overlap between the skills needed, and there can be a lot of cross-fertilization and improvements made through the collaboration between different skill sets. And then, as I said, we tend to accept people are their roles, whereas really everybody's an individual, and especially as a leader, we should see people as individual, identify what their skills are and help them grow. And in doing that, we're putting our trust in them, and they're hopefully going to trust us because we're helping them grow as individuals. This is another aspect. So I've experienced this in quite a few teams where people are not necessarily afraid, but don't feel it's their place to speak up and say, actually, I don't like the way things are, or I think we can improve something. And so we have to ask, are the people that you work with empowered to raise issues? Normally that comes through a formal kind of process, like a retro maybe. But also we want people to kind of raise issues as they go along, even if it's with a particular person, and they need to trust you to come to you to say, this person's done this thing, I'm not happy with it, what can we do? And they need to trust you enough to come to you to be able to resolve the issue. Are people empowered to suggest change? So again, I might be sitting there going, right, we're going to use Selenium, and somebody's got some experience that I'm not aware of, which says actually we should be using a different tool. And so do they feel like they can speak up? So these are all the kind of things where we want to build trust, and people need to feel trusted enough to be able to speak up. And also, how do we empower people to make that change? So if somebody says, I think we ought to do this, we agree it's a good idea, can we let them run with it? Or do they feel ready to run with it? What kind of support can we put around them to let them do that? So that's a kind of a bit of discussion around trust and acceptance and how I see them. So we're now on to my journey of trust. So it's all about me for the minute. First of all, I started off in the space of I just do what I'm told. Again, this comes straight out of school. I had a thing with, oh, the authorities told me to do this, I must do this. I was quite unquestioning and just delivered what they said, or even if I thought there was something daft about it, I wouldn't question it. Then I kind of got into a space in a company where I felt like I was delivering a lot, but there was a group of people who got the acknowledgement, they got all the kind of more sexy things to do, and my trust in the management at that point waned. I felt demotivated, and so I can kind of see that if I'm not acknowledging everyone in my team and helping them to grow, etc., then I can see they'll be demotivated. Our delivery will potentially drop. A satisfaction of the whole team can drop as well because of relationships and the kind of comments they might make if they're not feeling valued. And then another interesting space where there was trust, kind of next on my journey, was around offshore development. So I was running a test team. Some offshore developers were introduced. They were onshore initially. I joined the team when and this is I think this is back in early 2000s, and they'd used Quick Test Professional to automate our regression suite. And the way they'd done it is they'd taken our 70 odd scripts and they created 2 automation scripts, which both took an hour and a half to run. And at that point, I didn't really know much about automation, but I kind of had a gut feeling that that wasn't the right thing to do. So I went off and researched and came back to them and gave them advice on how, well, I said, we need to split this up. This needs to be better, easier to debug, etc. And so I then didn't have as much trust in them just because of the way they'd done that. And they were kind of given to me as experts in the field that should be delivering something that was good for the company and the right thing to do, but they hadn't. So my trust was a little bit low there. But we did build on that, and we came up with a working solution in the end. Unfortunately, not long after we did that, the company I was working for decided to switch offshore partners. And so I was in a new situation with another set of offshore automation developers. And what they did was they said, oh, we've got a proprietary system. You can't look at it. You can't see our scripts, but we can give you this spreadsheet with keywords in. And so I ended up in a position where I couldn't really tell what the tests were doing, and so I couldn't sign them off as doing what I felt they should be doing. And unfortunately, my management wouldn't support me in saying, you need to show us more because we can't sign off these tests. So in the end, there was just a passive trust that the right tests were being written and doing the right thing, which isn't a good place to be in, really. So I didn't have a great experience with offshore teams, or at least the separation from the tests that I wanted to understand as a test lead. But I had to let things go, and part of that letting go was understanding delegation. And so my first when I got into a position where I was leading 3 different teams, and I couldn't be as hands-on as I was, I needed to work in the area of delegation, and I just started giving people things to do that I didn't really want to do. And that was kind of the initial way I delegated. I just kind of went, oh, I'm a bit overwhelmed, I need to get rid of this, or I can do that. I didn't really think about necessarily who I was giving it to, or whether they were skilled or empowered enough to do it, which then moved me into kind of the understanding of more about empowerment. And so giving a task to someone that isn't solutionized so that they can use their creative skills to come up with a good solution. I can give direction, but I'll also make sure that if they need a mentor, it's there. If they need training, we can put that in place. And understanding that for me to trust them to do this thing, I also need to give some support around that. And so that's where I'm at the moment, is knowing that I need to understand my team, knowing that if I give them some work to do, I need to empower them to do that, and give them the space and the trust in me that they can come back and say, this isn't working, or I need to do something differently. So that's my kind of journey of trust in software development. So we're now going to focus in on trusting UI automation. So this has been interesting to me, because when I came onto my current project, probably about 5 years ago, we had a system that was very flaky. It had been built, and it had been built to a certain extent by well-meaning amateurs, if you like. We didn't have the technical skills when we built it for it to be scalable or easy to use necessarily. But it had also had a lot of different team leads through with different ideas, and a lot of different automation engineers trying different things out. So it was also a bit of a mishmash. And I had to take the decision that we're going to do something new. And so my journey now has been the last kind of 4 years really is building up and understanding this a new framework for our automation tests. And a lot of we've now got to a position really where our UI automation is as reliable as the integration tests we potentially have seen in the last 6 months. More
power on.
We've seen more failures in the last 6 months from the integration test than we have from the UI test. And part of that is because we've been able to see that the way the integration tests are written, maybe this is a place that we need to get the testers more involved in the reviews, because we're having things like hard-coded dates that are causing problems, and we're having to catch up with the integration test quality now that the automation framework is pretty steady away. And I can say that because this will frighten some people, but we've got probably nearly 3,000 UI automation tests, and they run in parallel. So we have parallel builds, and we use TestNG to run 8 threads at once. And we still don't get very many intermittent failures, as we call them. We get maybe 1 or 2 a week, but those are known, and we know how, and we investigate those and fix those. So as far as I'm concerned, we've got a pretty solid system there. Part of that is because we focused on code quality. My view, and having picked this up from someone else, is really that you wouldn't want to measure, you wouldn't want a poor quality measure for something that you want as high quality, and so your automation framework needs to be high quality code, so that what you're doing is you're measuring something with an accurate measure. It also needs the flexibility and the maintainability. So I've been able to trust my SDET, as you might call him, and I've just said in the past, I've just said, okay, then we're getting a lot more tests written now. What we need now is a way to expand, to be able to keep the time of the builds low, but continue to add tests. And so he went away and worked out a way of splitting up the test suites dynamically as it builds on Jenkins, and we looked at how many different threads we could have to run the test. So it's now, until somebody cuts off our AWS purse strings, we've got a way of expanding our UI tests infinitely if we wanted to. I don't really want to, but we could do it. So the kind of thing that causes flaky tests, dates, ages, and time passing. So as I said, you want to avoid hard-coded dates. If you're going to have people records in there, you need to make sure that you understand if there's, say, a date of birth, and you've got some tests that check an age, then you don't want to have to maintain those every year that person gets a year older. You want to be able to dynamically generate the people whose age you want to check. And then if there is something about time passing, it probably doesn't want to be in your UI automation framework. And so you do need to make decisions about what to have in your UI framework and what not to. Weights, instead of trying to work all this out yourself as an automation engineer, go and talk to the developer who knows most about the UI. And so we did that, and he pretty much wrote our weight code for us, so that we're now really confident that we're not going to have any problems with weights, and we don't. And that's one area where people don't trust UI automation. They say, oh well, weights, they really just don't work. But if you talk to a development engineer, collaborate with them who knows about the UI, JavaScript, whatever it's written in, then you can actually develop a weight strategy that will work for you. Non-deterministic outcomes. So what I mean by this is, in our system, it's a workflow system. If you go into a work queue, what will happen is you'll come out of that. If there's more than one thing in that work queue, the button will say review and get next. If it's the only one in there, it'll just say kind of move on. And so what you need is code around that to deal with that. And then data independence, I think that's fairly clear. Everyone knows about that. We've worked well on that, and we've understood our data in a strong way, because we wanted to run tests in parallel, and so you have to have independence. And each test needs a single atomic purpose, and that again I think is generally agreed out there. So the sort of UI automation we're doing is not end-to-end. We're looking at having a separate framework to do that, but it's not our core set of tests. And then you also have to watch out for laziness in selecting data. So it's not the tests, it's not the framework that are flaky, it's the way that the testers are selecting data for it. So again, if we look at a work queue, if everyone selects the same option and you end up, or the same person, and so you end up, when you do a search on that, with a couple of hundred records in the list, it's the sort of thing that can then slow your system down, and you don't really want that when you're testing. And it's probably unrealistic as well to think that that person might be in the workflow several hundred times. They're more likely to be in there once or twice, and so it is creating an unrealistic situation which slows down the tests and can cause failures. So really, you need to focus on your data as well. So that's kind of my view on why I don't think UI automation is flaky, and I do trust it to do what we want. But you can only do that if you focus on the quality of the automation framework that you build or use. So I'm marking safe from flaky test today. There we go. Trust in technical implementation. So this is another area where maybe we're putting some tacit trust, and maybe we can question what we are trusting. First of all, if we do get a failure in automation, generally we'll look at the automation suite and try and work out why that test is failing. We won't necessarily go to the system under test and think about, actually, is that the thing that's wrong? And sometimes, because we don't have the trust in the automation framework, we may well go back and change that test and go, oh, well, it must be the test that's wrong and not the system under test. And so you end up with tests that are verifying an error is fine within your system. And so looking at trust in that space is good as well. So you don't just blindly go, oh, I need to change my test. Also, we put a lot of trust in the unit and integration tests. And while we kind of feel that developers do a good job, and they do, what they could benefit from, and again, it's this idea of collaboration. It would be good to get testers and developers talking more about unit tests and integration tests, and so that the experience of the testers writing tests can be used by the developers to write their integration and unit tests. Again, I have seen some unit tests and integration tests that either serve no purpose or are fundamentally wrong. So it's something that doesn't get questioned as much. We just trust that unit tests and integration tests are correct usually. Then as a tester coming in to a new framework, you'll see that there's steps that are available for you to create your test. Really, we want people to question that, and especially if they're new, to have a look at that step and does it do what you think? Again, when I've come into a framework that exists and we've been running some tests, and again, it was around dates. There was a step that said check date is correct or something like that, or assert correct date. But when you look down in the code, all it did was assert the format of the date. And so you could have had a false impression that that test was asserting that the date was correct, whereas it was just asserting the format of it. So all you knew that was that it was displayed correctly. Also, you've got to think about how much do you trust and how much do you understand about your environment's data and users. So your environment is not the live environment, or it very rarely is. I know there are various people who think that testing in live is a good thing, but not really. So understanding the difference between what you're testing on your environment, the data, and the users, what is different there, because then you can understand the limitations of the testing you're doing. And so you're not blindly trusting that your environment tells you, is always going to tell you that something's going to work in live. We have had situations, and they're very difficult to work out how you would have tested it differently, where something like the firewall in a live system has prevented your change from working, and you don't generally have a firewall in your environments, and so you need to think about, well, how do we mitigate that in the future? Is there a way, or do we just have to put it live and then check in that area? Third-party tools, why do you trust the ones that you pick? So again, I'll pick Selenium. So generally we trust that. It's got a large user base. And we know that in general, it works okay. There are things wrong with it. So I had a quick look at the Selenium Git site, and on the 10th of June, I think it was, there was something like 349 open tickets. So there's potentially 349 things that you could say are wrong with Selenium, or is probably, once they actually analyze those and work it out, there's probably there may be 100, there may only be 50, something like that, and some of them might just be improvements being suggested. But we're trusting that that tool is correct, and yeah, there are some bugs with it, and there have been fixes. Otherwise, we wouldn't keep having releases. They're not all new functionality. There's usually some fixes in there as well. And so, do we understand by taking a third-party tool what its limitations are, and what things there may be that are kind of in error with it? Even using something like Excel, I found when I was producing some data in it once, I found that there's a date back in, I think it's around the turn of the century, like 1900 something, where Excel has got the date wrong, and so the leap year in 1900 doesn't exist in Excel, and that caused me some problems in my data generation. So there's things like that you possibly don't know about, but could potentially cause you problems. And so you're trusting quite placidly, in a way, some of these things, whereas there should be a bit more questioning is what I'm proposing. And then as you go on, you're trusting your original idea. Is it still the right idea? So a project I worked on quite a few years ago, we started off with the idea that we would inject data for tests directly into the database. But as the system grew, etc., that becomes almost impossible because the database is changing, and so you've got to change all these injections. Whereas if you use the APIs, you don't have to worry about the shape of the database. You just have to make sure that you interact with the APIs correctly. This is a picture I like to use in my presentations. I've used it before. And this is about models not being the truth. So this is a painting by Magritte. It says, "This is not a pipe." And you might be thinking, but that is a pipe, isn't it? And the idea was that Magritte called it the treachery of images. And the idea is that, yes, it is a picture of a pipe, but it's not the pipe itself. So in the same way, as I was saying, an environment is not your live environment. You need to understand that there's differences. And so I'm just going to do a kind of a little controversial challenge now about a model that we use commonly in test, and that's the test pyramid. So I'm going to say this is not a test pyramid. I can be pedantic and say it's actually a triangle, but I think people get too hung up on models like this. So the original idea was, and kind of all you need to take from the test pyramid is that it's most likely you're going to have unit tests, more unit tests, then you have integration tests, and you're going to have more integration tests, then you have automated UI tests or functional tests that you use, scripts that users run. But in calling it a triangle in the way that we do here, it kind of looks like, well, maybe if we had, I don't know, 420 or automated unit tests, then we would go down to maybe 300 integration tests and only 100 or something automated UI and 50 other tests. And so kind of while it looks like it should give you a really clear way of approaching things, we know, or a lot of us know from doing some test management, test reports, those kind of things, that counting tests isn't a good thing. And so just from that perspective, it shouldn't be taken as gospel that this is the way to do it. And if you just Google test pyramid, software testing pyramid, you will see so many different versions of it that is unreal. Whereas the original one was just 3 layers just to get across that simple idea. And we kind of take these things to heart. And as you can see with the one that I chose, people have then tried to make it clear as to what it actually means. But it still gets into that space of we're probably looking too much at this kind of space where we take this for granted.
Power on.
And what it kind of left me in the space of thinking about was, for all of these, then we don't really know. We don't have a good way of counting down. You should be able to say, I was thinking, what we really want to get out of this kind of idea is that I could say, okay, this function I'm testing here, which we have a spec for, how do I work out how many UI tests I've got, how many API tests, integration tests, etc., that are related to that function, and that's something that would be more interesting to me to find out coverage, because we may find out that, well, actually, while we've got a lot of UI tests, we only have a few integration tests for that area, and then we can start questioning whether that's right or not. And the other aspect of this is really kind of around, well, we could have conversations around the bottom half with developers and testers, and we could have conversations between the automation testers and the functional testers in terms of what coverage we've got. And I don't think those conversations down this pyramid that I'm showing are happening as much as they should. So we should be having more collaboration between all the people involved in writing these tests, whether they're seen as developers or testers or automation engineers, whatever we want to call them. So that's just an idea of the kind of thing we should be doing with these models, is questioning whether they are correct, or what should we be trying to get out of them, and not just taking them as the truth. So here we go, establishing trust and empowering. So kind of in this one, I try and not to react to people who do come in and micromanage me in a negative way, and so I've chosen this little cartoon to kind of illustrate that. So on the plus side, he has a plan and communicates well. So I will try not to react. Kind of micromanagement is one of my triggers, and I really hate it. But if somebody comes in and starts doing that, I will try and understand that person first, and then we will work from there. It's probably the best way to put it. So from that, I think I was looking for things. So we could talk a bit about bias. So I also looked at bias in this context as well, to a certain extent. And so everything I found is confirmation bias, because it kind of tells you what I want to say, and confirms that I'm correct, of course. So I found General Krulak's laws of leadership. He was a US Marine, and I quite like his laws of leadership. They kind of fit with the way I view trust and empowerment for the teams that I work in. So the first one is offer them the freedom to fail, and with it the opportunity to succeed. So it's giving people space, so they know they're not going to get told off if they fail, but I'll give them everything they need, everything I can give them to help them succeed. Micromanagement must become a thing of the past. So as I said, I hate being micromanaged myself, and I do try not to do it with others. There are times when I find myself over-explaining things, and because I try and be aware of how I'm acting, then that's something that I try and deal with. Yeah, so any supervision is really there. I try and do it through mentoring. So if I'm helping someone else, I might be seeing how they're doing as well in terms of supervision, but effectively I'm trying to give them what they need to complete their task. Don't totally agree with this one, but I haven't changed it. So empower them, certainly up for empowering them. I don't know about holding them strictly accountable for their actions. I would discuss, if something did not happen the way we wanted it to, how we could make it happen better another time, for instance, and whether there's anything I could have done better, or what kind of actions we want to take going forward. And I really like this last one, allow the leadership potential within each of them to flourish. So I spend quite a bit of time trying to understand the people I work with, and what motivates them, what skills they have, what they enjoy doing, things like that. And so that giving them that and the trust to do things, I feel like it gives them then the space to become leaders of, and it doesn't mean they have to lead a team, but they can lead by example in terms of what they're doing, and the knowledge and experience they have, sharing that with others. I've always been a fan of servant leadership. There's plenty of information out there about it, so I'm there to serve my team. It's kind of a Scrum Master thing as well. So the Scrum Master is there to protect them from all the rubbish that goes on the project that they don't need to know about, but to help them deliver what they need to do. So I always ask these kind of questions. How can I better understand each person? So by understanding them, I can help them flourish. How can I support their growth? So identifying areas where they're not doing so well, or they want to learn something, or identifying something maybe they don't even know about themselves. And so I can then suggest to them that maybe they could look at doing something in that area. And probably the most difficult one is the team cohesion. So in that area, you can have conflict, and I don't like conflict, and so I try and talk to people individually to find out their views and then mediate a way forward. There are occasions where it's just not going to work because people are so have their belief system which would be compromised by doing things a certain way, and so it doesn't always work out. But I do work hard at trying to keep the team together and keep them pushing in the same direction. And then I found this thing, nunchi, which is a South Korean concept, but it's really like emotional intelligence, and it's the subtle art and ability to listen and gauge others' moods. So if you're in a stand-up, for instance, and you notice that somebody's a lot less chirpy than they are usually, for instance, then you need to then think about that, and whether it might just be a one-off thing, or whether you should go and talk to them and see what they need. If they're consistently in a down mood, then you really need to go and talk to them and find out if there's any way you can support them. And by doing all of this, I kind of feel that, and it has happened in the past, where people have come to me because they see me as someone they trust and can approach, and have said, I've got this thing going on, I need to talk to someone about it. I don't feel comfortable talking to X or Y. And so I've been able to sit down with them and help them through the situations. And that's the kind of trust that I do try and build in the teams that I'm in. So suggestions for you. Have a trust audit. What is your flat earth? What the heck do I mean by that? So some people believed in the flat earth so much that it was very difficult, and that there still is a flat earth society. I vaguely remember a tweet saying something like they have members in all corners of the globe, or something like that, all around the globe. So it's kind of an odd thing, but there are still people who believe that the earth is flat. And what my challenge is to you, I guess, is to think about your project or your team, and is there anything that you staunchly believe is absolutely true, and can you challenge that? Like, is it really true? Is the question you want to ask. Who are your single points of trust? So is there someone on your team that you always go to because you know they're a safe pair of hands? How do you get out of that situation because that person could leave? How do you bring other people up to that level? And part of that is supporting your team's growth through empowerment and trust. That's what I believe. So as I said earlier, delegating without solutionizing. These single points of trust, I would suggest you approach them and ask them to be mentors for other and facilitate them knowledge sharing. And as a leader, if you're leading in a team, or even if you're not, focus on collaboration. How can you work better with people? How can you better understand them? Do they like to talk in long sentences, or do they work better in pictures? And finally, look and engage outside your project. So what are other projects doing? How can you learn from that? What are other organizations doing? And really, what's the test community? So being QA Babble, we're probably all involved in test in some way. What are they talking about? Is it important to you? How can you bring that in? Who do you trust out there as well? So who's saying things that you connect with? So maybe they're the people to start connecting with. But if you stay just in the bubble of your project, you're going to miss out on a whole lot. But if you start interacting and getting trust out there into the wider community of your organization and other kind of test communities, then that's pretty much going to benefit you as well. And that, he said, is that.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was an awesome talk. As expected, it's definitely got the grey matter going. I've got some really good questions for you. So I'm just going to work my way back through the list. So first question comes from Louise. Here we go. How would you empower someone who is not a leader to raise issues, suggest or enact change?
I think it's knowing that person. So for me, I would sit down. I tend to sit down with each of my team, maybe on a quarterly basis if I can. I don't always remember, so I'm not brilliant. But if that person is quite quiet, they may just want to talk to me through it. And what I've done before is sit with them in a meeting with somebody that they wanted to raise something to, and so kind of facilitate a conversation. It's about making them feel comfortable in what they're presenting. Sometimes, if it's been a contentious situation, then I've had to be kind of the message passer, as it were. But in a normal situation where they want to just say, I think it'd be better to use this tool, then I think the other thing I was going to mention was that I've been involved in improv as well, and it's kind of the whose line is it anyway. And part of that is that there's a key kind of idea, which is yes and. So you don't cut off any ideas that come up, you kind of build on them. So if that person said, I'd like to raise this, but I'm not sure how, then you can say, oh, that's a good idea, and this and this, and that kind of builds them up and builds up their confidence, so that while they don't feel they can lead with it, you're there with them, kind of delivering that idea to the team or to wherever we want to deliver it. Does that answer the question, do you think?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Next question is from John. If you're not using testers in your automation tests, how are you ensuring the tests are correct? He says, well done on the 3,000 automated tests.
Yeah, so I mean, this comes back to a bit where it was a kind of a one-liner in here, which is around, do you trust your steps? And some of the steps are quite a few years old, and so I've been thinking about this, especially doing this talk a lot recently, is how can I go back to those steps and say, is this still doing what we think it should do? We do find situations where, for instance, we originally set up a function that was going to check a table on a page, but it would only check one table on a page. And so somebody had kind of fudged it to check a second table because a new page had turned up with two tables on. And so when that's noted, we then create a tech debt. So we use the kind of the development process of tech debt to, when we've identified something like that, to then go back and change it. But I do think that question's a really good one, because we don't know. We're relying, as most automation frameworks do, on the initial implementation of a step, A, being correct, and B, being described correctly in the step. So if it is just a cert date format, it should say that. If it's a cert correct date, it should say that. But even then, you don't know which format. So there's all these different, there's a whole language thing that needs to be there, and you need to make sure your steps are correct and give the right information. But you also potentially need to create some space for people to go and check that those steps are doing the correct thing. I'd certainly encourage my testers, when they've written their test, to watch it run through, in case there's anything visual they can see that it's not doing in the way they thought.
Brilliant. Got a question from Ben Fellows. I'll give him a quick shout as well. He's an organizer for another really good meetup we sponsor called Midses. Go and check that out if you're looking for some more good content. Ben says, do your automated tests create the test data they need as they run, or does the data already exist in the database and each test just uses its own set of data?
So we have a mixture of things. That there are some, we have some data that exists, and we also have some factories. I think I talked about this on one of the lean coffee ones. So we have things like a factory that will clone an existing service. So a service exists in a certain state, we can clone that and then make some small changes to it. And then using the APIs, we then create that service, and then that service is used just for that test because it's been created at that point. And so we do create data on the fly for some of it, but there are other things like user data, etc., that exists as we go. So it's a bit of a mixture. And like I said, if we don't have enough, if people are being lazy when they write the test, then they might pick the same data every time, so the same user every time, and the same person going through the workflow. So it's a mixture of, we need to make sure our testers are choosing the right data, and we generate data, but we also have some that exists at the beginning.
Awesome, thank you very much. Got another question here from Amit. In DevOps, where it is useful to have dev, QA, and product environments as similar as possible, can you still say testing in production is not a good idea?
I think it's my experience of this is that I did work for a bank for a while, and they had a special way of testing in live, in that they had a branch which was a test branch, but it was on the live network, etc. You could actually go into shops and buy things with cards from that branch, and so that there was a whole load of security around it. There was agreements with shops because the people who did the shopping went in with an unbranded card, just a white card, and so that they knew that was acceptable. But that was one way I can see you could work in live, because it was all accounted, etc., and properly done. But if you go and test in live, in other ways, you don't want to be processing unless you've got a user who's actually doing it, and then you're doing the thing rather than testing. You know, there's a level at which you're no longer testing, you're just doing and seeing if it works, which is fine in a way. If you're using live data, then you're doing the thing. If you've got test data in live, I'm not sure that's a good idea either, because we've seen problems with that, maybe sending out letters to real customers and things like that as well.
Great, thank you. Another question here from John. How do you best build trust with the product owners and other stakeholders?
I think that's more along the lines, I mean, you have to build a relationship, and you are serving them to a certain extent, but you're also guiding them because you're the expert. And so they may think they want a particular thing, and if you can steer them away and help them understand how not to solutionize things, then you can have those kind of conversations and come back with what you need. The best project I've been on where I've seen it work was we had the product owner in, I think it was most stand-ups he'd come along. We had a show and tell every week. When we'd got maybe halfway through a sprint and had the front end of something working, we'd invite them in and go, okay, this is what it's going to look like. Do you like it? And so if you've got that kind of contact and availability of a product owner, then that's where it can really work. And sometimes it's not your team's problem in a way, it's that the product owner isn't available, and that's what I've experienced as well, is they're often not there. And so when you eventually deliver the thing, they say, oh, I don't like that, but they've not made themselves available. And so you have to have those kind of conversations about how do you make that, how do you get them to make themselves more available. So you have to do what you can to build the relationship.
Awesome, thank you very much, Martin. So I got a question here from Neil. He says, great presentation. What tips or techniques do you have for regaining trust? For me, trust is a difficult thing to gain, an easy thing to lose. What has worked for you in your experience where you need to gain trust?
very much I always look forward. So while we might need to discuss this was the thing that happened, that needs to be kept at a factual level when you discuss the thing that happened. So trying to keep the emotion out of it. So I'm not going to, if you start accusing the client of not giving you the right requirements and things. So there's quite a bit about language, and so if you start building up antagonism, then the trust is going to go, because you're going to be separated, and you need to kind of come together. So while they may have done some things that you don't agree with, you need to keep your language neutral, and explain what happened, kind of to a certain extent. Depending on who it is, you might need to kind of humbly accept that something went wrong and you're going to fix it. But then it's a case of having a clear path forward for what's going to happen next, something that they can see and that you can report on regularly and say, okay, we've done this step's done, we've done this step's done. So it's very much a case of building the trust again, step by step, and just by proving that you're delivering what's needed, and keep a conversation going.
And I've got one last question from Raquel. Do you perform exploratory testing to gain more trust?
Because of the size of the project I'm on, I'm not really involved much in the exploratory testing. My kind of belief, where I've seen it work is that kind of combination of what I've said a little bit about in this presentation, in terms of, I think it's good to have, not to kind of pigeonhole people. And so I think a tester is a tester, and if they can do automation, they might be able to do it at different levels, and they would also have that kind of exploratory experience. And so I think that kind of thing, it needs to be done. And I think if you can explain your exploratory testing and what it achieves, and how it's better and more maintainable, and kind of the benefits of it to a client, in that kind of context of it's part of testing, is what we do and it's how we deliver well, then I think that's probably the way I would take it if I was kind of more in that space, which I'm not on my current project. I would kind of say that this is the way we're approaching testing. Some of it will be done through automation checks, and we're going to use exploratory testing in this way, and just make it really clear to the client what that means.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Martin. That's super appreciated. We managed to wrap up that quite nicely for the 1 o'clock slot. So just for you go, guys, thank you so much again for being part of today's QA Babble. We've got Lean Coffee Morning up tomorrow. That kicks off at 8 a.m. till 9 a.m. Martin has kindly agreed to be part of that. Also, we'll do the Lean Coffee Morning based on today's discussion. It's invite only. You know, we try and get a good group together. We try and give multiple people a chance to do that. So sign up for that if you're interested. Drop me a connection request on LinkedIn. I can measure the details. Other than that, thank you very much for being a part of today. Hope you all stay safe and sane. I'll see you at the next one. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.